What's happening, y'all? Welcome inside the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Danny and Bush coming at you with our biggest fades in the early rounds of drafts. Yesterday, we would have talked about guys that we're targeting in the early rounds of drafts, rounds 1, 2, 3 of ADP. Today, we're going to be talking about some guys that we are fading. If you guys have been following this channel all summer, you guys are probably knowing what names are about to come out of our mouths. But for the people that are new around here, we definitely have to inform them. Some people just coming back into redraft season, just getting back into the swing of things. So we don't want to leave out anybody in these discussions. So with that being said, as always, Danny, how you doing?
Doing well, doing well. And yeah, you guys would have seen yesterday's video where we talked about our favorite targets, our favorite must draft type of players in those first 3 rounds. We got to go on the other side of the coin. You guys love the content. You guys want to know, okay, who are we targeting? Who are we avoiding? These are the guys that, for the most part, with how we build our teams, are not the type of players that we're going to be investing in quite often in our draft. So yeah, I'm good. I'm ready to go before we get into that first round. As always, you know what we have to do. Let's hit that intro. All right, so you guys should be able to see the first round ADP on the screen right now. And we started off with me last video, but we'll start off with you this video, Corey. Who is your biggest fade in round 1 of fantasy football this year?
Yeah, and I put out a TikTok that was titled "My Biggest Round 1 Fade" for Dalvin Cook. And if you guys aren't following us on TikTok, obviously link in the description. But Dalvin Cook is my biggest round 1 fade. I have him ranked at 23, so more of like a late second round type of player. He's going off the board at like 7th overall. There's definitely a lot of good with Dalvin Cook, which is why I go back and forth on, am I just fading this guy to be cute? Am I just fading this guy because the data is telling me, should I be just trusting the player? Because he's a great talent, or at least he's been a great talent for the most part in his career. He has a big workload, a lot of red zone usage. It's a good offense. So the fade could definitely come back to bite me if he punches in 14 touchdowns next year. But I conducted a study on this channel in the video titled "Sell These Running Backs Now Part 2, figuring out when formerly elite running backs, multi-time RB1s like Dalvin Cook would fall off a cliff from an efficiency and injury and a fantasy point standpoint. And the fall off ended up being around 27 years old and 1,100 touches. Dalvin Cook just turned 27 about a week and a half ago with 1,200 career touches under his belt, over 1,000 of those touches carries. Plus, we have a player who hasn't played more than 14 games in his entire career, which definitely will not be aided by the fact that he has all this increasing mileage under his belt. And finally, the biggest reason why I'm off of Dalvin Cook is because we saw his play fall off a little bit last year. Tops of the league in yards per touch, tackles avoided per attempt, yards created per touch in 2019 and 2020 when he was an elite fantasy running back. Last year, he ranked 21st, 27th, and 39th, respectively, in those metrics. So fantasy points over expected as well. Another guy that has been one of the most historically efficient fantasy points per touch running backs in the league for the past couple of years. It was a negative number last year. So he was actually worse than he was expected to be. So despite all the pass production, despite the touchdown upside that he has this year, I don't think all of these risk factors are baked into his price. And that's really what it comes down to for me. There's really no need for me to take this risk at 7th overall, which is, it's a tough part of the draft to be drafting in, but I would rather just take, Saquon Barkley at running back. I would rather take Austin Eckler at running back. I would rather take some of the elite wide receivers if I'm trying to go safe with Devontae Adams, with Stephon Diggs, with any of those guys. So to me, there's no real need to take any unnecessary risk with Dalvin Cook in that area of the draft. I don't think he's going to be terrible. And if he falls to like the mid-second round or whatever, I'll definitely consider him at that point. But when we're holding injuries against, Saquon Barkley, but not against Dalvin Cook, and especially when Dalvin Cook has a diagnosable predisposition to shoulder injuries, I think it's, the fantasy industry not being consistent, and the ADP kind of reflects that. Plus, he's older than Saquon Barkley with way more career touches under his belt.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that too, because I'll talk a little bit on the play too. But in terms of the shoulder propensity to get hurt, Dr. Edmund Porras has actually aired his concerns on Dalvin Cook's shoulder each of the last 2 years. And well, it's not, an issue that is for sure going to, result in him missing a ton of games. We've seen it down the stretch these last few years that in terms of games playing 70+% of snaps, so he's missed a few games here or there as well, but in terms of games playing full 70+% of snaps, getting that full starter workload that we've seen from Dalvin Cook, he had 6 games going under 70% in 2020, 7 games going under 70% in 2019. So this is a common occurrence for Dalvin Cook. And not to mention, you mentioned a little bit of the fall off in play with Dalvin Cook. If he's not getting that, 70, 80, 90 plus target receiving role that other backs like, Alvin Kamara, Austin Eckler, even DeAndre Swift in this range kind of supplement that fall in rushing efficiency. It really reminds me, I hate to say this, and people are going to see the jerseys behind me, but it really reminds me the outlook that we thought of Ezekiel Elliott from 2019 going to 2020. Obviously, with Ezekiel Elliott in 2019, coming off, a top 10 point per game finish where he looked like he could still do it, but you saw some decline in terms of his efficiency from, early season or early career Zeke versus 2019 Zeke. And then in 2020, the rails fell off. The efficiency fell off. He was basically, as we saw, propped up due to that situation, due to that touchdown scoring opportunity. I feel like as a community, we're doing the same thing with Dalvin Cook. And again, I mentioned this when we were talking about Leonard Fournette on yesterday's video, but aside from, the preconceived notion of the talent discrepancy between Cook and Leonard Fournette, what does Cook have that Leonard Fournette does not? And the difference obviously being 25 overall ADP for Leonard Fournette, 7 overall ADP for Cook. Because if we're looking at it from a situational, from a peripheral standpoint, offense, receiving outlook, and potential scoring opportunity all favor a guy like Leonard Fournette. So realistically, if I can get, Jamar Chase and Leonard Fournette versus, Dalvin Cook and Keenan Allen, I know what my answer is going to be 100 times out of 100.
Yeah, exactly. It really all comes down to cost with Dalvin Cook. I don't hate Dalvin Cook, but the risk factors are not baked into his cost. And the fact that we have to kind of project him to have like a bounce back season at an advanced age with a bunch of career touches under his belt is something that I'm not willing to do. I'd rather be a year early on a fall off on a running back than a year late. And I was a year early on Ezekiel Elliott last year, and it benefited me because I bypassed him on all my underdog drafts. I was not drafting him where he was going. Hopefully the same thing happens with Dalvin Cook this year, but it definitely could bite me in the ass. So a guy that both of us were pretty wrong on fading last year, we could definitely be wrong again on him. But Joe Mixon, a guy that I don't feel like I'm fading, but I guess I'm fading him.
Exactly. I don't dislike Joe Mixon. If he was, an early to mid second round pick and you want to take him there, I am perfectly fine with it. I just have a problem with that 10 overall ADP. Currently, my overall 19th ranked player. Again, argue if you want to rank him, 13 to 16, sure, go ahead. But this is just me preferring a different archetype of my running back if I'm taking one as high as Joe Mixon is going. So I prefer an archetype of a guy like, Saquon Barkley, Javonte Williams, Alvin Kamara, DeAndre Swift, due to the ceiling range of outcomes that they have. And at FSC, as you guys know, from a general strategy standpoint, we've talked about it ad nauseum this offseason, but we believe that if you're drafting running backs highly in your drafts, they should have that league winning, Christian McCaffrey, Austin Eckler, Jonathan Taylor of last year type of upside, 20 plus PPR point per game type of upside. And while I think Mixon's a safe bet to finish, that RB5 to 8 type of range, given the offense, given the scoring opportunity, I think due to the pass game limitation and reliance on that goal line work, he doesn't really have the pathing to win leagues. And as I kind of said, at 10th overall, I want a player that is not only going to, be fine at his ADP or play to his ADP, but can downright smash it. So Taylor Eckler, I mentioned from last year, CMC Barkley from years past, and even some of those elite wide receivers that are usually taken at that range, such as, a guy like Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill in years past. So this isn't me hating on Joe Mixon or the peripherals of his situation. I actually like the player. It's just 10th overall is just way too inflated, obviously due to the nature of RB thirst, specifically in home leagues.
Yeah, I think when you look at some of the running backs that you mentioned, Saquon Barkley, Alvin Kamara, DeAndre Swift, those guys usually they have multiple paths of getting there, right? To an elite ceiling. With Barkley, you have receiving upside, you have the fact that he's an elite player, efficiency, breakaway plays, touchdown scoring opportunity. Same goes for Kamara, receiving upside, scoring opportunity. With Mixon, like the guy has to score 15 touchdowns or he's going to bust. Like it's going to happen. If he doesn't score at least, 10, 12, 13, 14 touchdowns, you're going to be really disappointed with that pick. And it's very likely that he does because he plays in a great offense, but he's been historically inefficient. He's not involved in the passing game. So unless he falls in the end zone 15 times, he's going to disappoint a lot of people.
Yep, for sure. So the honorable mention that we both have in this round, and again, not a guy that we hate because obviously the talent is clearly there for this player, but a guy that we both have at 11th overall, ADP of 6th overall, is the king himself, Derrick Henry. And fading Henry, again, is more so out of principle and situational change rather than us, acknowledging him, oh, he fell off a cliff as a talent. No, he is still an elite talent at the running back position, but it's hard to ignore the fact that the backbone of his 24.2 PPR points per game he scored last year came off of 30 opportunities per game and about 1.5 touchdowns per game. Prior to that regular season ankle injury, he was a very, very good player. But the concern right in that, a 250-year-old, 28-year-old running back coming off a regular season ending ankle injury in what should be an offense this year that should see its hiccups. Without the presence of A.J. Brown in town, I do have severe question marks over the strength of this offense, over the validity from a consistency standpoint, and putting them in red zone inside the 5 scoring opportunities for a guy like Derrick Henry, who, if he doesn't have that to his game, if he doesn't have, 10 touchdowns in 7 games in his range of outcomes, I don't know necessarily what I'm getting myself into. Is it a slightly improved Nick Chubb situation of years past? Is he, going to be fine as the RB 8 to 10 because he's scoring, 10, 11 touchdowns instead of 18, 20? That's the risk that it carries. Not to mention, of course, we've talked about the fact that his workload, his age, his size coming off that injury, he will be more prone to breaking down as opposed to, say, a guy like Christian McCaffrey who gets the injury prone label. I'm much more worried with Derrick Henry falling down due to the nature of his touches.
Yeah. When you're getting a lot of carries up the middle and you're taking a beating 30 times a game, like what Derrick Henry is doing, we saw him start to wear down after a 30 opportunity per game workload at the beginning of last season. You have to wonder, like, because Derrick Henry could make us look real stupid for fading him, right? Like he could have 25 points per game next year and carry the ball 400 times, and we're like, yeah, he's an outlier because he's just an outlier of a human being. He's not. Nobody else is that big. Nobody else can handle a workload like that, and he might end up in the Hall of Fame someday as a result of that. So Derrick Henry's not a guy that I enjoy fading, that's for sure. And early on in underdog drafts, when he was going towards the back end of the first round, I was getting quite a bit of shares of him. Now that he's kind of settled out in like the middle of the first round area, I've been fading him a little bit more in favor of some of those wide receivers. But again, it's not that I don't like Derrick Henry. I just don't find myself drafting him very often because I take those wide receivers like Adams and stuff ahead of him. And usually Henry is off the board before I'm willing to pick him. So 3 straight running backs in the first round. Color us shocked. We had 3 straight wide receivers as values yesterday. Today we have 3 straight running backs as busts and fades in this round.
And I'm glad you mentioned that too. Not to mention, I quickly wanted to just get into the fact that you've heard us say, well, pathing to RB1, why all these running backs that we've mentioned kind of have pass game limitations and why we'd prefer players with, 70, 80, 90 plus receiving targets in the range of outcomes. Well, I think David Gautieri did a very good job explaining this in a recent tweet, but basically in full PPR leagues, a target is worth about 3 times the value of a carry. And in half PPR leagues, it's worth about double the points in terms of a target versus a carry. So why we prefer players that will get a ton of targets? Well, the math is pretty simple. If you're getting, 230 carries, but 90 targets, that's going to be more valuable than a 340 carry, 40 target, 35 target type of running back. So we're just playing the range of outcomes better because ultimately, if a guy has 90 plus targets, it's more likely he has a 65, 70 reception season and gives you not only a plus in the receiving game, but an elite advantage in the receiving game.
Yeah, which would have led you to guys like Swift last year and, Kamara in years past and Eckler, obviously, big winners from those perspectives. So we can move on to round 2. In round 2, it was a little harder to decipher guys that were like way, way lower on, but one name really, really stuck out to me. Nick Chubb, I have substantially lower than this. Like I have him in the 4th round of ADP. He goes in the 2nd round of ADP. He's ranked at 49 for me. He goes at pick 20 overall. And everybody wants to label Nick Chubb as like this safe pick that won't bust your fantasy league. And I really want to know why, because he's a really talented running back. Like he is so good. Like he's such a good player. But to me, a safe running back would be a volume play like Najee Harris, or a safe running back would be a guy insulated in a great offense like Eckler or Fournette or somebody like that. Nick Chubb has neither of those things in his profile. Without Deshaun Watson on the field for at least 6 games, probably more with this appeal coming, it looks like they're pushing for a full season suspension out of Deshaun Watson. I am completely out on Nick Chubb as a 2nd round running back. The only path Nick Chubb had to an elite season or a great season was the same path that Joe Mixon had, where if it's a great offense, maybe Nick Chubb punches in 15 touchdowns. But Nick Chubb has been a solid back end RB1 for a few years now. 3 top 10 finishes towards the end of that top 10 in points per game. But the issue for him has always been that he doesn't have a large share of the backfield. And we also now have to worry about the fact that even if Kareem Hunt were to go down, which we saw last year, we're like, oh man, maybe Nick Chubb's going to be great with Kareem Hunt down. They used Dearness Johnson right into that role, so it didn't even matter. I know I personally thought that Nick Chubb was going to be like a league winner last year when that happened. His best season came in 2020 with an RB7 finish in points per game. And not shockingly, this coincided with the Browns being the best offense that they've been in Nick Chubb's career. They were top 15 scoring offense that year. So I expect Jacoby Brissett, maybe Jimmy Garoppolo to be the quarterback of this team for the most part this season, which will likely be the worst, if not one of the worst offenses that Nick Chubb has ever played in. So we're getting a guy who, while he's talented, he has breakaway speed and, he's going to create some big plays, doesn't have a huge workload, doesn't get receiving work, is probably going to be limited from a total touchdown standpoint playing in a bad offense. There's just way too many risk factors. Plus, he's still a running back and he still has a lot of carries under his belt. There's no reason for me to take him over many of the running backs going in that area, and especially not over a lot of the wide receivers going in that area.
Yeah, no, I agree with you as well. I have him in the 40s of my rankings as well. So with a guy like Nick Chubb, again, you talked about the safe label. Well, what's so safe about a running back that has never eclipsed 300 carries and never eclipsed, aside from one season, actually he had 49 targets, which was a complete outlier prior to the Browns signing Kareem Hunt. Since then, he has not eclipsed over 29 targets. And the 29 targets he had, oddly enough, were in his rookie season. The last 2 years when he's been healthy, 18 targets, 25 targets, respectively. To put it simply, in any type of PPR format, half or full PPR, that is not going to suffice in a running back that you can't expect to get 350 to 400 carries. The only path that Nick Chubb would have to be a league winner would be if he got, ground game volume similar to a guy like Derrick Henry, which is just not going to happen. We've seen it 4+ years already since he's been in the NFL. That is not how the Browns want to deploy Nick Chubb. They want to keep him fresh. They want to use him in conjunction with Kareem Hunt. They want to keep him as this highly efficient 5 to 5.5 yards per carry type of running back, which makes the Browns better. But as we know in fantasy, we don't care necessarily how good the team is going to be based off the usage of the player. We just want that raw volume. We want that player to get as many touches that it can possibly handle. And we have no real evidence that Nick Chubb can handle a 80 plus, 75 plus, 70 plus opportunity share like some of the other workhorses in the league.
Yeah, and even with his limited workload, he has seen his share of banged up injuries, dealing with, like, he dealt with a knee injury a couple of years ago. So it's smart by the Browns. And if you and I were running an NFL team, there's no way we would appease fantasy owners by giving Nick Chubb a huge workload. You have 2 running backs, 3 running backs that are good players. Use them all. Well, there's no reason to overwork one over the other. Keep them all healthy, keep them all fresh. It's the smart move. We hate it for fantasy, but that is the reality of the situation. And a lot of the times with Nick Chubb, we get clouded knowing that, oh man, he's one of the best running backs in the league. He should be a high fantasy pick, but that's not really how fantasy scoring is designed. Hence why we have guys, like DeAndre Swift last year, played for the Detroit Lions, wasn't necessarily the most efficient running back in the league, but he was a top 10 running back in points per game.
Top 5 before that week 12 injury. Yeah. And that was on the back of elite receiving usage rather than, 5.5 yards per carry like Nick Chubb was doing. Like DeAndre Swift was a sub 4 yards per carry running back, but nobody cared because he was giving you fantasy points through the air.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of fantasy points through the air, which is the bull case for the next guy that we're going to talk about, Aaron Jones, who I talked about in the avoid these running backs video. I talked about all these guys pretty much in that video. Aaron Jones, we have him ranked at like 17 in like he's going in the mid second round at about pick 17. We have him in the late 20s at 28. So you could take it away with Aaron Jones.
Yeah, which, by the way, nothing like, trying to propel a near 28-year-old running back into a insanely career outlier in terms of receiving usage, because that's basically what people are doing. People are pointing to the fact that, well, Devontae Adams was the most trusted weapon on Green Bay. The next trusted weapon now is going to be Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones is suddenly going to turn into Alvin Kamara, Austin Eckler, because he's good in the receiving game, but he's never been used in that way, which is always the excuse of people. He's never been used that way, but he's always going to be capable of doing that in the limited sample size. Well, the problem I have with Aaron Jones, to put it simply, is the usage that we saw from him last year compared to the 2 years prior went down tremendously. Only 15.73 opportunities per game down the stretch once A.J. Dillon emerged in this offense. For reference, in comparison to the last 2 years, 19 and 18.9 respectively. Not to mention, not only is he losing overall opportunity share to A.J. Dillon, he's also losing valuable goal line touches that propped up his value in 2019-20. So you guys can see on the screen in 2019, so the below image there, he got 44 of the 69 opportunities that the Green Bay Packers, in terms of rushing opportunities, the Green Bay Packers had in the red zone, including 23 of the 30 inside the 5 carries. Last year, with A.J. Dillon emerging, A.J. Dillon actually out-touched him from a rushing game perspective in the red zone. 43 out of the 93 red zone rushing attempts went to A.J. Dillon. Only 34 of them went to Aaron Jones. But the worst part is the inside the 5 carry breakdown. 11 of the 24 went to A.J. Dillon. Only 8 of the 24 went to Aaron Jones. So it's clear as day now that A.J. Dillon, the young ascending running back, Green Bay wants to get involved in the red zone area. Green Bay wants to get involved in the goal line area. He's a big-bodied running back. He fits the style of Matt LaFleur. They want to grind him between the tackles when they get in that area. Regardless if you want to say, well, Aaron Jones has been one of the most historically efficient running backs in the goal line. Why would the Packers do it? We can't assume rational coaching. A coach just might say, well, this guy's a bigger body. He gives me a chance, without actually acknowledging that Aaron Jones had been one of the most efficient running backs. But if he's not used in that area anymore, we can't just bank off that past success. With Jones now, we're getting that diminished goal line opportunity, that diminished red zone opportunity, in conjunction with the fact that, as you kind of said, everybody's propelling him on vacated targets. Well, a good friend of ours, Wiser Fantasy, I'm sure he'll be plugged in the description, but he actually made a TikTok recently pointing to the fact that there's minimal correlation pointing towards expected points from a running back room based off vacated targets from the year prior. So basically what that's saying, if a highly touted wide receiver or a couple wide receivers leave a team's receiving core, there's not much correlation in years past pointing to the fact that those targets are automatically going to get distributed to the running back position. So because of this, because of the fact that the community is expecting this, even though the data points otherwise, because of the fact that A.J. Dillon has chipped into that rushing role, we're drafting Aaron Jones based off the floor here rather than ultimately a ceiling, which, to put it simply, I don't think is much higher than like RB7, RB8 maybe at best.
Yeah, it's almost the same exact argument with the Cleveland running backs. They're both great players. They both are going to be the focal points of this offense, both on the ground and maybe a bit more through the air than we saw last year. But we're hearing from Packers camp that A.J. Dillon also looks good in the passing game. So while the running back position in general might see an uptick in targets, I don't think it's all going to Aaron Jones. And they're not going to, because I've seen people say, well, maybe they use him more in the slot and stuff. But most of that stuff is kind of narrative-y and anecdotal. Maybe they do, but it doesn't usually make a huge impact on the stat sheet. Could Aaron Jones have a career high in targets this year? It's definitely possible. But I also think, like you said, with the red zone touches and stuff, that stuff is being diminished from the other side of his profile, as are the overall carries that he's getting as well. So I think these two guys are just going to cannibalize each other, and it's unfortunate, but it's probably going to lead to A.J. Dillon being RB19 in points per game and Aaron Jones being RB13 in points per game, neither of which you were probably happy with your draft pick unless one of the other guys gets injured.
Yeah, and I mean, exactly. Do they have contingent value where if one goes down, the other, becomes a very valuable pick? Of course. Like if AJ Dillon missed some time, obviously Aaron Jones would see a relative uptick because he would have access to that goal line role again. But if you're taking such a contingent player in the second round of your fantasy drafts, I'm sorry, but that's not a good investment. I mentioned, the emergence of AJ Dillon down the stretch last year. Well, in weeks 1 to 3, A.J. Dillon was used sparingly for the most part, only 20 total opportunities in those games. But week 4 on, we saw that opportunity rise from about 6.7 opportunities per game to about 14. In that stretch, week 4 on, Aaron Jones averaged 13.9 PPR points per game, RB20 across the season. So again, I'm going to make reference to the contextualized game log series because that really opened my eyes to the fact that this is much more murky of a situation that people want to admit, specifically when a guy you're taking in the second round doesn't have a workhorse ceiling and doesn't have Austin Eckler-like receiving usage.
Yeah, exactly. There's the guys make sense where they're going. I understand why people are getting there. I think the overall target volume for Aaron Jones is being a bit overrated. Could he see a bit of an uptick, as I mentioned, for sure, but I don't think it's going to be drastic. I think it's going to be similar to what we saw out of Aaron Jones last year. They know how to use these two guys. They've had them in town now for, a couple seasons or whatever. And before that, it was Jamal Williams and Aaron Jones. I don't think we're suddenly going to see some massive uptick in targets for Aaron Jones. So we can move on to the next guy, which is our honorable mention for the second round, in Mark Andrews. You guys probably know why I'm fading Mark Andrews because I never draft early tight ends. But Danny, why are you fading Mark Andrews a little bit at his price?
And honestly, this isn't me being against Andrews, the player. I think he's a very, very strong player. I think it's a very fine investment in the second round. It's just more so the fact that outside of the two names we mentioned, the second round is very well priced. I mean, aside from Aaron Jones and Nick Chubb, we're pretty much aligned with consensus for a lot of these guys. It's just obviously the four discrepancy with Aaron or Mark Andrews is going to make the honorable mention. The advantage that Mark Andrews gives you, of course, is huge in fantasy, but I do think it's overrated compared to the tier 2 guys specifically, the Kyle Pitts, Darren Waller, George Kittle tier of next. I don't think that tier break is necessarily large enough to cover the opportunity cost difference, because if we're just looking at it from a pure economic standpoint, from a production bundle standpoint, would you rather have a production bundle of Javonte Williams and Darren Waller, or Mark Andrews and David Montgomery? The answer is clear as day to me because I do think in Darren Waller's range of outcomes, he has a 15, 16 PPR point per game season, relatively similar to what Mark Andrews is to provide you. And then, of course, I mean, it's night and day the difference between Javonte Williams and David Montgomery.
Yeah, it really is all about where Mark Andrews is going. I think also, too, like just on his own profile, like the Ravens threw quite a bit more than we expect them to throw this year, last year as well. So that is something that we have to take into account with Mark Andrews. He had like 150 targets last year. That is a shit ton for a tight end. I don't think we're going to expect to see that much volume for Mark Andrews again. Maybe his efficiency goes up. Maybe he scores more touchdowns because Lamar is returning for sure. But in the mid-second round, I'd rather take the shot on a high-end wide receiver, a high-end running back, paying off at that price then and let Andrews slide a little bit. Probably for me, he's more so like an early third round pick.
Yep. No, I'm fine with that. I'm fine with investing into him in the late second, especially if you have a backbone piece like Jefferson, Kupp, Christian McCaffrey, Jonathan Taylor. At that point, I'm fine with taking him at the back of the second because then you can just wrap around, take an elite receiver, running back that falls back to you. But if you're taking him in the mid-second round and you're pairing him with Austin Eckler, Najee Harris, whoever's going, Derrick Henry's going in that range for the most part. I would just rather take a player with more upside in terms of raw point production potential at that spot.
Yeah, exactly. So into round 3, final round of this video, you guys can see the round 3 ADP on the screen. I mean, like, we're going to sound like broken records here, but more old running backs that we're fading. Ezekiel Elliott is going off the board at pick 32 on multi-site ADP. I have him as my 63rd overall player, so a massive fade for me. Again, I wouldn't draft him until probably like round 5, round 6. And even then, like, I have to rank him somewhere, but I probably still would be hesitant pushing the button on Ezekiel Elliott. He's coming off of back-to-back seasons scoring outside the top 10 in PPR points per game, being the RB16 in points per game last year. Drafting Zeke is a floor play. Like, people are drafting him because he's in a good offense and he's been a previously successful fantasy running back. And at a third-round price tag, you're really paying for RB2 production, which we know is more replaceable than pretty much any other position in fantasy football. You're better off attacking, some of the elite wide receivers going in this range, like, Michael Pittman Jr. is going after him, DJ Moore. You can get many other guys in the 4th round, like Allen Robinson and Deontay Johnson, all those type of dudes. I'd much rather have those guys than Ezekiel Elliott.
Yep. No, I agree. I also we also have outlined here the difference in terms of red zone opportunity from the last time Zeke's been an RB1 versus this past year. So the last time Zeke was an RB1, obviously in 2019, the last time he kind of looked like himself, he had 61 of the 79 Cowboys red zone rushes, including 18 of the 21 inside the 5 touches. We saw last year, Zeke only handled 39 of the 81 Cowboys red zone rushes and only 14 of the 24 inside the 5 carries. So his role has diminished. And if you guys didn't already see that from the red zone opportunity, we'll also got the overall opportunity. His last season, when he was the pure bell cow, when people were pointing, oh, look at the elite workload, look at the offense. This is why this guy's a top 5, top 6 overall fantasy football pick. He was on a 84.3% snap share, 5th in the NFL, and a 77.5% opportunity share, also 5th in the NFL. We saw those numbers drop last year to a 65.9% snap share, which was 10th, and only a 57.7% opportunity share, 20th in the league. So with Ezekiel Elliott, a declining player in terms of efficiency, with a player that's dealt with multiple injuries in the past, with a player that's handled nearly 2,000 career touches, now not even getting 60+% of the opportunities, yeah, I am worried with a 3rd round price tag what type of ceiling you're investing into. And I alluded to it in the 1st round. I alluded to it in the 2nd round. If you are taking a running back early in your drafts, they are not floor plays. They are not plays that are just going to fill in your RB2, set it and forget it. Oh, I'm fine with, the 13 points that Zeke's going to get me this week. No, because you are passing on potential league winners at the wide receiver position. Next year's Cooper Kupp, next year's Jamar Chase. Guys like that are what you find in the RB dead zone, the round 3 to 7 area. Whereas Ezekiel Elliott, to me, is the prototypical dead zone running back. So passing on that elite league winning potential receiver is just malpractice.
Yeah, it's dead zone running backs have the same kind of formula. Usually they're players that have projectable volume, which kind of, like we outlined, isn't even as projectable as it's been in years past of Ezekiel Elliott's career. And usually there's something wrong with them from like a talent or an efficiency standpoint. And with Zeke, It's that he's kind of fallen off a cliff from a talent perspective. So I'm totally out on him. There's pretty much zero scenarios that I've drafted him. I have like 2 shares on Underdog,
Same.
and I think he fell to like the 50s for that to happen. And I only drafted him for the sake of texture, getting him at that point.
Yeah, no, the same as me. I think I have 1 or 2 shares of him, and immediately after making the pick, I felt like I needed to take a shower because that's how greasy it felt. Because yeah, he felt like 11 picks after ADP. I'm like, okay, I'm on obviously a macro portfolio. I want to get some type of texture. Again, I'm still only like 1.5% total shares, so and even that feels like too much.
Yeah, exactly. Another guy that, if it hurts to fade because he's obviously the best quarterback in the league, but Patrick Mahomes, I have ranked at 62. He goes at 31 overall in ADP. And again, we're using multi-site ADP for this because multi-site ADP has more home league type of drafts, and people will take Mahomes high in home leagues because they know what they're getting, right? He's an elite quarterback in the NFL, just like Nick Chubb at running back. His real life value is affecting his fantasy value because I have Mahomes QB7 because the loss of Tyreek Hill is a bigger deal than people want to make it out to be from a fantasy perspective. I think he'll be just fine from like a real life perspective. He'll still look like a great quarterback, but he opened up that entire offense. That big play element is how you got those ceiling boom games out of Patrick Mahomes. And while Juju and Travis Kelce and Sky Moore and Marquez Valdez-Scantling is a fine core of weapons, I think it's a solid group for Mahomes to be a locked and loaded QB1 in fantasy. I'm not drafting a locked and loaded QB1 at pick 30. If I'm drafting a quarterback around that pick 30 range, I want Josh Allen. I want a guy that can give me 25, 28 points per game, league winning type of quarterback performance, and maybe probably can do it from a passing and a rushing standpoint, like what Josh Allen can do. So even though I like Patrick Mahomes, obviously, as a player, Kyler, Lamar, Herbert, Brady, Burrow, and even honestly like Prescott, Stafford, Russell Wilson, and Trey Lance, some of these guys might have higher ceilings than Patrick Mahomes, and you can get them at a substantial discount relative to where you have to take Patrick Mahomes. It's just let another sheep in your league take the safety of Patrick Mahomes in round 3, because a lot of people do this. They get 2 good picks, early on in their drafts, and then it comes to the mid round, they start making mistakes because they want the safety. They draft Patrick Mahomes. They're like, oh, I don't like any of these wide receivers or any of these running backs. I'm just going to take Patrick Mahomes because I know what I'm getting. But you have to take into account the opportunity cost to get that player. Would you rather have Patrick Mahomes in round 3, or would you rather just take Dak Prescott in round 9?
Exactly. And I kind of mentioned it in terms of the Mark Andrews pick, where we like the players. The talent is clearly there. But again, economically, would you rather a production bundle of Patrick Mahomes and, I don't know, 8th, 9th round receiver, like let's just
Darnell
say
Mooney, Brandon Ayuk?
Chris Olave? Or would you rather, as you kind of said, Dak Prescott and like Marquise Brown, or Dak Prescott and maybe like a Michael Pittman? Like the answer is clear, because the difference between Mahomes and Prescott, obviously, Mahomes is the best quarterback in the league, is a more talented quarterback. But from a projectable standpoint, like what is Mahomes probably going to land in the 35 to 40 passing touchdown range? Like, are we really expecting Prescott to be either way under that? Like, no, like Prescott's going to be probably within 3 to 5 passing touchdowns of him. And if Prescott gets that mobility back that we saw lacking last year, maybe he chips in another 4 or 5 rushing touchdowns, and the gap is like 20 points, 30 points total on the season.
Yeah, and there's a range of outcomes where he just straight up outscores them too.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah.
So
So with Mahomes, it's all name value. Like, don't draft Patrick Mahomes this year. He is going ahead of a lot of these other quarterbacks. I straight up have Jalen Hurts, Kyler Murray, Justin Herbert, Tom Brady, Joe Burrow, like all these guys just rated above Mahomes straight up at face value, let alone the fact that you can draft them in the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th round relative to the 3rd round ADP that you have to spend on Patrick Mahomes. So yeah, he is not a guy that I'm going to end up with at all, probably in any league. I'll let my league mates draft Patrick Mahomes. Another guy that I'm letting my league mates draft, and another one that fucking hurts because this dude is a super talented player. Kyle Pitts, we disagree on this one because I have him ranked at 42. He's going at 32 in ADP. You have him rated right around there. I believe you have him at 31 or something like that. But Kyle Pitts is the dynasty tight end one. From a dynasty perspective, he's obviously a superstar in the making, but I cannot get on board with an early to mid 3rd round ADP in redraft leagues. Me and Danny disagree on this. But as much as I think Kyle Pitts is a locked and loaded 1,000-yard tight end this year, I have serious questions about this offense. He scored 1 touchdown last year with a better quarterback than he has this year. So is he going to score 1 touchdown again? Probably not if he has like 120, 130 targets again. But he's probably not going to score 8 touchdowns after having a 1 touchdown year with Marcus Mariota as his quarterback, who will probably only throw 15 to 20 touchdowns total on the entire season. Are people really going to be satisfied with a 1,100, 1,200 yard season, 4 to 6 touchdowns out of Kyle Pitts on the early third round as the price tag that they paid for him, when you can get a Dalton Schultz, Dallas Goedert type for maybe 1 point per game, maybe half a point per game? Like, Dallas Goedert and Dalton Schultz could have 900 yard, 9 touchdown seasons, which from a pure fantasy point standpoint, 900 yards and 9 touchdowns versus 1,200 yards and 4 touchdowns is essentially the same amount of points, depending on how many points per reception that they get. So for me, it's all a matter of cost for Kyle Pitts. I think he's great. I think he's a great breakout candidate. If I treated him as a wide receiver in getting the tight end scoring, he obviously is a big advantage at the position, but it's more so who I'm passing on at wide receiver and running back in that area of the draft. I can get, Leonard Fournette types. I can get AJ Brown types where Kyle Pitts is going.
At that point, of course, like I'm taking those type of players over Kyle Pitts, but I do think after about pick 28 in terms of my rankings, you kind of get like a flat tier of wide receiver. So like as much as I like, names like Deontay Johnson, DJ Moore, etc. Like as much as I like those guys, and I think they're validly in that tier for me personally. Like you're past the Keenan Allen, Michael Pittman, T Higgins, AJ Brown area. So at that point, I realistically think the mid to late third round this year is an ugly spot in general. So with Kyle Pitts, the reason why I'm more willing to take him is that there's a range of outcomes where this time next year, he's a top 15 pick. Like if Kyle Pitts next year goes out, he had a near 20% target share as a rookie. If he goes out and has a 25+% target share, which again is lofty, but for a 22-year-old best tight end prospect of all time, is definitely in the range of outcomes. If he goes out there, does that 130 targets, let's say 135 targets, there's a range of outcomes where he's a 80 reception, 1,300 yard, maybe of course you said 8 to 10 touchdowns, probably a little bit unrealistic, but I could see 6 or 7 from him. And if that's the case, you're landing at about 14 to 15 PPR points per game at that point. If you're getting that from a third round pick, obviously there is a disconnect between him and like Kelsey Andrews. But of course, given the talent level, you could absolutely smash that. Because I mean, realistically, outside of Waller, Kittle, and those top two guys, there shouldn't really be a tight end that crosses 12 and a half, 13 plus PPR points per game this year.
Yeah, it's just with
It's
Pitts,
tough.
man. I don't think we're getting any kind of baked in discount by the fact that he hasn't finished as an elite tight end yet, which I don't think is something that should be baked into his cost, but it is something that hasn't happened yet. And number two, we know that he's not going to have like some super high touchdown ceiling unless he had some crazy quarterback upgrade. If he had Jimmy Garoppolo as his quarterback, I'd be on board with this price even. But Marcus Mariota, I don't think is going to be / Desmond Ridder, whoever ends up playing games for this team. I don't think is going to be good enough to suffice, a tight end scoring 7, 8, 9 touchdowns when they do have some other guys to throw to now with Drake London coming in. So I'm just not on board with what I have to pay for Kyle Pitts. It has nothing to do with the player. I just think I'd rather take Darren Waller a round and a half later. I'd rather take George Kittle a round later. I'd rather take Dallas Goedert and Dalton Schultz a couple rounds later. So that's kind of where I'm at with Pitts.
Yep, no, definitely fair. It is a little bit of a riskier pick, but because of the unknown factor where if he does go out and smash and he can like not only beat his ADP but smash it, I'm still more willing, depending, of course, on the texture of the board that I'm looking at. But my honorable mention is going to be James Conner, running back from the Arizona Cardinals, currently our ranked 38th player. He goes off the board 30th in ADP, but I have seen him creep up closer to the early portion of the third round. I'll get into his actual performance, his actual on-field performance as to why I'm a little bit off of him. And it's just mostly the archetype that he kind of represents. Obviously, people are going to point to the splits that he spent without Chase Edmonds in the lineup last year, but I am hesitant to just anoint Connor to these splits and say, well, this is what he is when Edmonds is out of this team. Because the Cardinals did invest in the running back position this offseason. They brought in 6th-round rookie running back Keontae Ingram. Benjamin has apparently been looking good at camp, and obviously the signing of former Chief Darrell Williams is a lot of supplementation in that running back backfield to James Conner. So the ceiling is there if he does develop into the bell cow. I'm just hesitant that they're just going to anoint such a player that relied upon so many touchdown opportunities last year into this full-fledged 20 to 25 opportunity per game back. Again, this could bite me in the ass if he does become that player, if he is tethered to this offense, but I would rather lose out this on this type of archetype and just swing for a Travis Etienne, swing for a more natural breakout candidate, as opposed to obviously the 27-year-old coming off a peak season where it doesn't really align with the rest of his career like James Conner did last year.
Yeah, and we saw in the preseason game that they rested both James Conner and Darrell Williams. I think that tells us who they think the starting running backs are. And I think Darrell Williams, he was good last year too. And he was, better than CEH when he got the opportunity for the Kansas City Chiefs. And he's an adequate pass catcher who can pass protect as well. So I think he's going to slide right into the Chase Edmonds role if I had to guess. And with James Conner too, he's not been a guy that's been able to hold up over the course of a full season for the most part with a big workload. He was able to do that last year, but we've had conversations with Dr. Edwin Porras that because of, the cancer that he had in college, he has a predisposition to maybe not be able to hold up to a bigger workload similar to the way that other running backs might be able to do. So it presents another element of risk with James Conner that exists with all running backs, but even more so for him. And we've seen it play out when he was a member with the Steelers as well.
For sure. And I mean, looking at the rankings right now, obviously he's going ahead of, for example, teammate Marquise Brown. Like at that point, given a structural drafting type of opportunity there, give me Marquise Brown easily in what should be a high octane vertical offense. Obviously, Marquise Brown with that relationship that he's had with Kyler Murray, obviously he presents an opportunity to potentially be the wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5, wide receiver 6 throughout the first 6 weeks of the season, and is going to be had at much less of a risk than a guy like James Conner. So just a change in philosophy for us as to why we avoid these type of running backs.
All right, so we've made it to the end of the video. If you guys have made it with us 40 minutes or so, hit the like button if you enjoyed. Comment any of your thoughts down below. Who are you fading this year? Who's somebody that you think is going too high in the early rounds? Subscribe to the channel if you are new around here. If you guys want to check out Underdog Fantasy, you can use promo code FSE at sign up and first deposit to get 100% back on whatever you put in. It'll get you a ton of practice for your home league drafts, and at the same time, get you our rankings for free. So all you have to do to get our rankings, if you guys are wondering, is put $10 on Underdog Fantasy. You'll get 20 on the site to play with. You'll get our Dynasty and our redraft rankings for the year for free as a free gift from us. So if you guys are interested in that, the links are down below in the description. And you can also check out our Patreon for tons of other content as well. That is also linked down below in the description. So with that being said, peace out. We'll talk to you soon.